Right. Thank you all. Daniel, VP of Engineering for over 10 years with Shopware. What makes you come out of bed in the morning, put on the blue hoodie with black,
I don't know.
whatever?
So I really like how we are able to build a solution that so many people are using out there, and that's like people are excited about. I hope you are at least most of the time. And that's really what drives me. So there's always change in the ecosystem. There's a lot of things that are like also changing in e-commerce and like finding solution for that. Like the teams find solution for that, honestly. But that's really what drives me.
Yeah. Make sure we stay ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Great. So you chose to talk about architecture today, something you're very keen about. Now, it was my understanding that with the advent of 6.5, we had peak PHP development. Everything was good, nothing had to change. Why are we talking about architecture?
So I guess, honestly, things always need to change. And so you might remember that 3 years ago, we announced this Shopware 6 thingy, and it was quite a change. And one of the things we said back then is that we will not do such a big change again. And that means something, obviously, because if we just stay the same, like it would be a bad situation for us. And so that I think we need to constantly evaluate how we're seeing things, how we want to further improve our architecture. And that's basically why I'm here today, so to talk about our thoughts and our ideas, and then honestly, directly or later this day, get feedback about it, learn about your ideas. That's the idea about it.
Right. So let's set this up, the architecture talk. We're mostly talking about monoliths here, right? We chose a monolithic architecture for Shopware 6, even 5 already, and I guess all the previous ones before, although those were iron cubed, so I have no clue. We are revisiting this. Is monolith still a valid idea? Should we abandon this? Should we go all microservices?
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, it is a good idea. So generally speaking, I think it's a spectrum, right? So it's not about like being on the one end of the spectrum or on the other side, but like find a pragmatic sweet spot that makes sense for the way we are seeing e-commerce. So that's the idea about it. And I guess the way we are handling things are generally speaking quite good for us because it's about the right amount of pragmatism. So it's about like being able to get started with development quickly. It's about being able to like spin up shops, to spin up development environments in an easy way. So reducing mental load to a certain extent also as a developer. It's about being able to handle extensibility for the projects, to be able to like adapt the shop to the merchant's need in the projects. And I guess that like this monolith kind of way has its benefits there. At the same time, obviously, as I said, like things are changing. So today we're talking a lot about like Shopware composable front ends, about guided shopping. We heard earlier by Jens that like people want to run perhaps the back end in Lambda functions that changes requirements as well. And it's more going into an API-based extension. So like I think more than about plugins versus apps, the discussion needs to be how can we change the APIs that Shopware has, so the extension interfaces in a way that you can make good use of them, and being more explicit about the extension points rather than saying it's an open box, do whatever you want. So like this, do whatever you want, always leads to update problems later on the line. And I guess somewhere there is the point where I think we need to adapt and we need to invest in the architecture to like get this done in a proper way.
Right. So, but the argument that a monolith is susceptible to spaghetti code, more or less, right? Can we solve that as a monolith?
I think so. So I like again on the spectrum, it can be shitty on both sides. So you can have a big ball of mud on the monolith side, and you can have a lot of distributed ball of muds on the other side. So I guess it's developing it further in a way that it's like modular in a way, and I guess we still have something to do there. So it's sometimes we might have a tendency to spaghetti at some places still. So I guess that working on that is what we need to do, and then also find a smart answer to what is core commerce and what is like things around that should not be part of the monolith in the first place. And I guess that said, for Shopware it will always be that more things are part of the core commerce than for some of our competitors. So I guess Shopware will always be broader than many things around there.
Yeah, I think it's also based on trend, right? We see that e-commerce in general is more and more external services from third parties that
absolutely.
That already force you in that direction. I could imagine. All right. But we are not going to microservices, right? Are we the next tool that one uses to do commerce?
No, I don't think so. So for me, it's really about shaping the architecture in the right way to have a clear understanding what core commerce is, and then make smart decisions there. Like also be able to, in the long run, perhaps have services that are not part of the core Shopware, because currently, honestly, everything is part of the core. It might be a plugin from Shopware, but it's always part of the core backend we are running, the PHP backend.
We're talking about the PHP core, right? The fact that you have a Symfony or a couple of Symfony bundles in, right? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess like there could be things like we're thinking about, I don't know, data pipelines, processing data from the merchants and offering some analytics functions or machine learning functions instead. That's something that you don't want to run in the project. So like your life will not get easier if you're running a full-blown data pipeline and you need to host it somewhere. So that's obviously something that we might host in like our Shopware network. And that is then used, for example, with connections that the app system provided or with other high-level APIs. And I guess other examples could be, for example, our 3D efforts. There's also some things that don't naturally fall into the PHP backend of the core. So
and it doesn't just mean hosted by us, right? I mean, looking at advanced search, for example, that can still be hosted by by the merchant.
Absolutely, and I think that's really the sweet spot of the discussion, so that like something like advanced search, I guess you would be not happy if that's something that's only provided by Shopware as a cloud service or something like that. So I guess that's in many projects need to run by themselves, and like finding answers to how to deploy and run that in a smart way, that's actually the challenge. So currently I have the feeling that like Shopware is more like, well, obviously it's a software product, but how do you host it? Where's the answer for that? Is there documentation? Is there a container you can run? So where do we help you with that? And I guess we need to provide you with answers, how to run and scale Shopware in a better way and have a stronger opinion about it. So that's what it's about for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do we prevent ourselves from ending up with an endless patchwork of cloud? SaaS.
Yeah, as I said, I think that's not really where we're heading to. It might happen for some cases, as I mentioned earlier. Machine learning is a perfect example. Data pipeline is a perfect example. That are things that we need to run in our services, so to say, so like in the Shopware network world, because it's not feasible for most of the projects to like run those kind of things and gaining no value directly out of it, right? So who wants to do that? And also, it should be not a surprise that we're also thinking about how can we like facilitate, for example, 3D elements in the CMS, so how we can move further in that. And again, that's like 3D always sounds, on the first thought, it sounds a bit like, yeah, I can just have a nice JavaScript render in my browser, but really it's not that. So it's you need to have a full-blown 3D ingestion pipeline where you, I don't know, upload your models, where you can map textures to it, where you can optimize the models, and those are things that are not part, from my perspective, of the commerce core, but those are services that we will run for the merchants if they want to use those kind of services. And I guess no one is losing something when we do that. And at the same time, advanced search, as I said, is something that we will always get your hands on. You can host yourself if you want to. So that's.
So it also opens up our ecosystem to developers that might not write PHP code or even Symfony code and maybe do JavaScript, Rust, whatever. Is it also about, like you said, you want to be pragmatic, having less extremes, so refactoring the plugin system or at least introducing something new? Is it also about finding that middle ground?
Yeah, I think so. So if it comes to plugins and apps, I guess it's more about like having high-level APIs that you can talk to. So it's true. So we're doing that for apps already. So for apps, as Sergej just mentioned, so you have usually APIs you can talk to. We introduced, so for example, talking about text calculation in Shopware, right? So in the past, you would have to decorate some cart services and then munch in your own calculation, and it's all like quite nasty, honestly. And then with the app system, we are in the mindset that we say, okay, perhaps we can just give you a configurable option that you can have an own a service to calculate your taxes or like implement third-party vendors. And I guess that's way more interesting of a way of extensibility. So not getting into details of the Shopware PHP backend, but having clear interfaces that you can use and just say, hey, for taxes, talk to that service, and then we will deal with that result later on. And I guess the interesting part is that we need to make the same kind of thinking available in plugins. So also plugins allow you to go quite low level into the PHP part, and that's good, so we don't want to change that. But we want to add APIs that will allow you to do this kind of high-level extensions so that you are less prone to update problems and so on. And that's, for me, really the direction we need to go ahead to. And another example is, for example, again, it's something that was triggered by this whole app discussion. In the app system, with app scripts, you can have a facade taking care of your price calculation. So for apps, we introduced a way that changing prices in the cart becomes easier. And why not making the same system available for apps? So why not having high-level APIs in plugins as well, so that if you need to do a plugin, you can still make use of these high-level APIs that make your job easier. And I guess that's where we honestly were falling short in the past, because everything was possible by DIC decoration, I don't know, and like we need to have smarter answers for you for the typical things you want to change in your projects.
Yeah. It does sound like this is going to impact the way I run Shopware, right? It's no longer just going to be a LAMP stack, or maybe with some Redis on there. It sounds a bit more complex. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, honestly, Shopware already is complex to run, because as soon as you have a proper Shopware project who has some, so they will need a database in the first place, they will need to have Redis configured in order to scale in the cart, they might have like a caching solution in front of it. So Shopware, if you're looking at it realistically, it's never like
we're already there.
It's not like deploy and run. It's many services around. And what I think is why I think this discussion is so relevant, so that we as a vendor need to provide you with like a better opinion or better instructions how to do it. So have a strong opinion about how to run Shopware best. And we're running it ourselves now for 3 years. So I guess we are at least having some say into it, how it could look like in a proper way, and that we make this available to the community, so that there's some way of instructions, infrastructure description, whatever, so that you can work with in order to run Shopware in this scalable manner. And that will also help us at one point if we say there might be additional service, like a PHP backend service that is like separate from the core for whatever reasons, that is just part of this unified setup structure. And it's not like something you need to learn, but it's all in this unified setup we will be creating. Yeah,
and this will ultimately require more from our hosting partners, of course, that we'll need to take by the hand and work together with.
Absolutely, and I think so. In the past, I think we often did strange things in the core to work past certain limitations in hosting, so like cron jobs being triggered from the admin and so on. And again, I'm just wondering, if we're solving problems for merchants and professional merchants, we can also assume that they have professional infrastructure to a certain degree. And at the same time, we don't want to like artificially raise the bar without no meaning. So I guess it's again like about being the pragmatic in the middle somewhere and not in the extremes. But yes, I can imagine that we raise the bar in certain degrees at least.
Yeah. Moving on to developer experience, because that's what it's all about. What's going to change for us as developers? What can we expect?
So talking about this idea for the unified setup, I think that first of all, we need to like come up with an answer how to develop Shopware in a proper way, because currently there's a lot of development setups, and like I said, every month there's a new way how to like run Shopware in the development setup, so kind of. And so I think we need to have a strong opinion about how this works, also for smaller merchants, like how does an optimal small installation of Shopware look like? So that will be one answer. And I guess we need to also have an answer for this full-blown setup I just mentioned. So if you're about to run Shopware in a scalable manner with like replication of the databases, with Redis clusters and so on, how does it look like in an optimal way? And that's something that developers will need to learn to a certain degree, but I also think that's something that then on the long run make everyone's life easier. And that's like, again, this infrastructure topic. I guess the second big one will be the apps plugin discussion I just touched. So having higher level of APIs and extensibility interfaces that you can then leverage for apps and for plugins and the like. So that's, I guess, where we need to go.
Well, I think Flow Builder is a nice example, right?
Yeah.
If you want to send an email, what you do is you create a new flow, and the end user can even adjust that, or at least the admin user, right? So more declarative way of approaching
Absolutely.
problems.
So, and I think that's really, so it always sounds a bit like too high level for a developer discussion, but if you're able to just configure a third-party service in the Flow Builder to talk to, that can also help developers. And as I said, a declarative schema is a good keyword. So having a way that you can tell Shopware what to do, to talk to which service for text calculation, instead of having to extend classes in order to do a simple price calculation over and over again in every project.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think also a big part of this is going to be the dog feeding of the app system, right? Testing it out ourselves, building the B2C B suite as maybe as an app, or maybe start with something easier, but really getting to understand what is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a discussion. Zege mentioned it beforehand, so it's a discussion we are actually having like almost every day currently. So all the plugins we're having, like advanced search, B2B, we're challenging, could that be an app? And at the same time, to be realistic, if, for example, B2B Suite would be an app, it would live in the cloud, right? And for many of your and our customers, at this point, that's not what they want. So we need to make it available for hosting as well. And then that's where the discussion becomes more complex. And so B2B will still be a plugin for the time being. But for the other things that I mentioned, like all these machine learning things, 3D ingestion pipelines, 3D features, those most likely will be apps, or at least use the same extension system, such as apps.
Yeah. All right. This one is a hard one, but what's in the future for Shopware? What is my setup going to look like in 2 years? It's going to be one big app?
Yeah. No, so honestly, I think in like 2-3 years, we will still have and like support and like also support people to do that, have self-hosted, we will have PaaS offering, we have SaaS, so it will be the same offerings, but there will be more tooling and a stronger answer from Shopware how a proper PaaS setup looks like, so, or how a professional setup looks like, this unified setup thing. So that's one pillar, so we want really provide you with the tooling that you need in order to run Shopware in a scalable manner without having all the headaches. So ideally, you get something where we all find all the answers already and that it just runs kind of flawless. So that's one thing we want to provide. And then, as said, higher level APIs, talking more about API-based extensions than about plugins or apps. So that, I guess, is where it needs to go, so that you can do projects with, like generally speaking, as few Shopware knowledge as possible, so that you're really able to say, okay, I understand roughly how the Shopware checkout works. I know in order to modify prices, I can use this and that API, but you don't need 10 years of Shopware experience to modify some prices in the course. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. Let's say I am a developer with an opinion. We don't have many of those, but let's say I want to get involved.
Yeah.
I want to voice that opinion. I think a good one was, for example, how to extend fields in the admin, right? That you want to have a slot, or maybe I have a suggestion for the app system. How do I get involved?
Yeah. So, so the official channel is our user voice feedback system. So if you have something that you want to put in there, do it. So that's the best way to reach out to us, obviously. And then other than that, really use days like this. So like annoy me and Zege and all the other ones who said strange things on stage. And talk to us, give us feedback, because at this point we're like really sharing our early ideas in order to learn if you like them, and if you also agree, okay, that's where you need to invest Shopware, and perhaps you say it's something completely different, why are you not doing this? And that's so better than user voice, at least for today, is like talking to us and really be annoying and say, hey Daniel, what's about this one? So I would really appreciate if we could have some perhaps even heated discussions about things that you like different perhaps in the course. So that's my answer to that.
Right. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.